I'd now like to move on to part 3 of our webinar and to introduce our panel of scientists to answer all of your questions. Please pop your questions in the chat, and I'll start by looking at physics and how it can help us to solve the world's problems. In March 2020, a woman unknowingly infected with COVID-19 spread the disease to 71 other people after taking a solo trip in a lift. Enclosed public spaces with recirculated air, like lifts, are high risk for spreading disease. But what if there was a way to purify the air and keep the space free of virus particles? A group of scientists from ANSTO, one of Australia's biggest public research organisations and Australia's Centre for Nuclear Expertise, teamed up with tech professionals from its Innovation Centre Nandin for NASA's Space Apps COVID-19 Challenge to try and solve that problem. They did and won the hackathon and are now commercialising their research. That is, they're making it into something that we can utilise to purify the air in enclosed spaces. To tell us more about it, I'd like to welcome our first panellist, Dr. Mitra Savabi. So Mitra is a senior physicist and research lead in human health at ANSTO. Her two main research areas are radiotherapy, particularly in relation to treatment methods for cancers with poor prognoses, and medical imaging quantification, which is detective work into time and spatial aspects of images. Mitra is one of the co-inventors of neutron capture enhanced particle therapy. That's a new technique to address cancers without damaging surrounding tissues. In addition to her scientific research, Mitra has also enjoyed competing in challenging technical hackathons, leading 3 teams to win in Australian international competitions in 2020. She is the CEO and CTO of GaiaPod, which is a startup company that she has founded with 4 other team members to commercialise their award-winning technology. And I'd like to invite Mitra to unmute now and to join us on the panel. Pretty amazing hackathon and results there. Maybe not necessarily what people think about when they think about physics and physicists. So what do you think is the biggest kind of misconception that people have when they think about physics?
Maybe that we all look like Albert Einstein. The big hair, the big white hair, and look a bit unwashed, that we're all eccentric. We are stuck in our labs in front of our whiteboards. If people have heard a little bit about physics, they might think that we are all string theorists or theoretical physicists, or we are astronomers. But physics is, well, I mean, science is in fact the best approximation of the truth that is out there. So physics has a way of merging and overlapping with other fields. So we have biophysicists, we have quantum computing specialists, we have statistical physicists. So I think that might be one misconception, and the fact that our work is quite solitary, that we are like little, we like to huddle and hide in our own little holes or boars and work by ourselves. But I routinely work with groups of 10 or more. One of the problems that we currently have with our constraints around traveling is that I can't take my team somewhere. So without my team, I'm nothing. I suppose the last one that I can think of is that our skills are not really transferable outside of the academic. That science and technology and commercial products are different. Quite a few of the methods that we use in science are directly transferable to commercialization and to businesses. So I think I like to say physics is life, but
I love that you said that, and I love that you talk about those transferable skills, because some of the people in high school now might be looking at going into 17 different jobs and 8 different career areas. You can jump into and out of different areas of science, in industry, in academia, in startups, and you just have some amazing skills that are kind of developed from that. Particularly in physics, it's kind of seen as a bit of a men's subject for some reason. What was most interesting to you in choosing physics, and what are the kind of big picture problems that physicists can solve?
So I have to start with a bit of a disclaimer here. I did grow up in a family of scientists. So for me, it was an inherited condition. I never felt like I could not be a scientist. In fact, might have been a little bit predetermined for me, and I had to push against it, find my way around it, and make sure that science was indeed something that I wanted to do rather than something that I fed into. Um, but I would say that um, I like to look at it as a diversity of cognition. I think when, as people from different genders or skin colors or ethnicities or linguistic capabilities, we come together, it is not just that physically we look different. Those physical manifestations are indicative, in my opinion, of a process of cognition evolving differently. So whilst we've all gone through universities, hopefully as scientists, we might have gone, we might have been brilliant people and just like Ramanujan, never received formal training and come up with amazing theories. But majority of us follow the traditional way of going through school and then university and then specialize in a field. We all receive the same curriculum, but because of that difference in the experience, we tend to think about it differently. Our process of cogitation is slightly different. And I think bringing it back to what I have learned over the past year is that that diversity of cognition really makes us strong. And that diversity of skills, when we all come together, make us super strong. And I made a joke recently that as a woman, I knew very early on after having a child that I was fine with not sleeping, and I could work the following day. So as a particle physicist, that's a very important skill because we tend to work late at night. We have what we call graveyard shifts. Those are when hospitals stop treating patients and the beam comes to us physicists or engineers to do experiments. So I knew that I could handle 2 nights of not sleeping and still, be compos mentis and understood by people, whereas my male colleagues tend to get a little bit grumpy after the first night, and then or I had to apply them with sugar and chocolate, and they later on combine it with caffeine, and towards the end, just the level of conversation was going very quite monosyllabic. So yes, no, and then we graduated to grunts.
We have all sorts of hidden skills there. Mitra, tell us about a kind of typical day as a particle physicist. Like what might you do?
Well, you can see that I'm at home now. So this is my workroom at home. So clearly the stereotype of working in a lab doesn't really apply to me. My day today started, actually continued from last night. So I went to bed at 4 a.m. because I had a meeting with people from France, New York, Vancouver, and we had to work at a time that we could all stay together, and the conversations just evolved. So we continued talking and working on the data. A lot of it is thinking. So we come up with something that we think is odd or doesn't fit to what we think our predictions should get us to. So once we have identified that problem, we look at doing simulations. So simulations are what I like to say, when you're poor, you simulate. So we don't always go straight away with doing experiments if they're expensive, both in terms of time on the facilities and the cost of the human time. So we tend to try and train our computers and our computational networks with data that we think represents reality. We test everything, we develop methods. Um, my days usually are spent around looking at data, discussing it with my colleagues that are chemists or biologists to make sure that what I'm thinking matches their perception of reality or of that problem. And we also talk a lot to people that find science interesting. So right before this session, I had a meeting with a school from Tasmania, uh, year 4 students that just had some burning questions around vaccines and how safe they are, um, or what is the biggest star in our universe? Are volcanoes real? Do volcanoes exist outside of our planet? So communication in science is really important, not just for us communicating our results to lay people, but also amongst other scientists. We need to make sure that we check the veracity of the data we produce, that we explain it in a way that other scientists can understand and reproduce and replicate our results, and um, and then move on to the next problem and try to invalidate or falsify the next hypothesis.
Yeah, but science is just such a team enterprise, and teams can be your own team, teams across the world. It's just, you know, fantastic. Like it's a very, very social job, and I don't think people think about it as a social job. I can see that we've got some careers advisors joining us here from Redlands College and from Somerville House. Nairi, we'd love to have your questions. Please do pop your questions into the chat or the Q&A for Mitra. Mitra, just on teams still, you had a really diverse and interesting team working on that NASA hackathon. How kind of important is it to have those teams to make sure that the science we're doing is really, you know, relevant and useful for everybody?
I think, as I said, I think it's super important. So the diversity of skills in the person is important, and the diversity of skills in the team is important, and not just skills, the diversity of cognition. So there's never one direct route to where we currently are by ourselves or in the team. And I wanted to actually put that out there for the career advisors that are out there. So if somebody comes to you and says, you know, I want to be a particle physicist, there's so many different routes. You don't have to go and study a Bachelor of Science to become a particle physicist. You can attack it from engineering. I When I was in Canada, one of my friends, he did civil engineering, and now he's one of the best medical doctors that I know. So at the end of the day, moving between fields is quite easy. Bringing it back to the team that came together for the NASA hackathon, I don't think I would have worked with these guys had it not been for COVID. Um, we had the whole year mapped out in terms of the experiments that was focused on the work that we were doing around finding better treatments for cancer. And COVID made us landbound. Australia is an amazing country in terms of it being an island, and it's protecting us. But at the same time, it means we can't really leave and go to use the international facilities that we're used to using. So, but at the end of the day, we wanted to do something. We wanted to address a problem or find the problem first, and then try to be part of that solution. And the hackathon, well, all the three hackathons were started and initiated around the problem of COVID, and they were trying to solve a problem, either something that was acute or something that looked towards the future. So, what is the future of work? What is the future of manufacturing? Um, and with the NASA one, it brought the science from space back to Earth. Can we employ some of the techniques that are used on the International Space Station or for our long-term missions back to address the problem on Earth, or one of the problems on Earth that has risen or is helping or assisting COVID getting traction and spreading.
Yeah.
And we had one of the people on our team was a respiratory scientist, or is a respiratory scientist. In fact, he's now leading the commercialization efforts for this particular technology. And so we started talking to him. We validated our hypothesis very quickly that it is in fact an airborne problem. At that stage, WHO hadn't changed its recommendations around wearing a mask, for instance. So there were still debates around the problem of aerosolization. I am a physicist, so fluid dynamics for me and the way particulates move in air is something that is quite easy to model, or very roughly back of the envelope calculation. So we looked at some of those models. And then we have a very gifted mechanical engineer on our team that had also some background in working at airplanes and their ventilation systems. So we knew how we could change the flow of air in cabins, in closed spaces, to stop the transmission outside of these closed spaces. And And then we do have again a gifted data scientist. Data science is one of those fields that is quite new in science. So when you go back to chemistry, biology, astrophysics, these are things that are as old as our civilizations. Humans have always looked up at space. But when you look at data science, um, I think the first statistician that is noted is Florence Nightingale. And she actually used statistics and charts as a way of demonstrating the impact of keeping things clean on the health of the soldiers. If you go back to Napoleonic times, Minard, who was a civil engineer, was the first person who used infographics as a way of presenting data. And he showed that in terms of what was the number of soldiers that were going towards Russia and how many came back, and mapped it against the geology or topology of the area and the weather. And the message there was don't attack Russia. And I think Hitler forgot that as well. So but in terms of visualization of data, how we should best present it, and how what we can glean from it. We had again someone who could work with big data, and then anything that you design, as my colleague and very good friend Shan likes to say, has to look beautiful and has to be usable. So we had a very gifted industrial designer, and I'm sure she's going to talk about her skills here, but she made sure what we had designed or what we had in mind in terms of utility can be brought back into something that can be easily deployed and used by its users. And hopefully we can get it translated to Australia and the rest of the world soon.
Fantastic. And it's just amazing to hear you talk about all of that different variety of skills that go into science. For kids in high school, what kind of subjects would they choose if they want a career like yours? Is it just about specializing in physics and chemistry, or are there other sorts of things that you should be thinking about?
I'm reading a very good book by David Epstein called Range. I'm not sure if people have come across this book, but it's a book about, again, as I said, there's no direct path to getting somewhere. So one of the anecdotes that he brings is the comparison between Roger Federer and Tiger Woods, how Tiger Woods had this mindset of, I'm going to be the best golfer in the world. And he knew that he was going to play golf. But Roger Federer wasn't like that. Roger Federer had tried a whole variety of sports before he landed on tennis, and he actually came to tennis rather late. So I think, again, going by my own experience, I knew that I wanted to do science, and my dad used to joke with me that, okay, you're going to be an engineer, and it's going to be either a telecommunication engineer, an electrical engineer, or I think there was no other or actually. It was all about DSP.
You had a little bit of choice, but not
signal processing. And I remember I once went to him and I said, so what do you think about architecture? And he said, that's art. So I don't think you're going to be an artist. But in terms of knowing, I knew that I loved physics, right? So for me, physics married the beauty of nature with mathematics. And I was in love with mathematics from an early age. I loved the beauty and the logic and the reason that was buried inside mathematics. So maths and all flavors of maths, geometry, statistics, trigonometry, calculus, I buried myself in those books. But at the same time, I'm an avid reader. I love reading good books, be it fiction or nonfiction. I think, again, I don't think I'm a person who people should aspire to be like. I think there's so many better accomplished or more accomplished scientists out there. But I think basic and fundamental sciences are important and a way to communicate those with others. Other scientists, it's important for us to have a common language to speak, and also the public. Public has to understand what we do, and they have to also understand the scientific methods. The lost continent of Atlantis is exciting, but I think having a unifying theory that brings big and small together is also very exciting. And in my opinion, that is more exciting. Yeah. Understanding the temperature of black hole is a lot more exciting than the Bermuda Triangle. So it is up to people like me and other scientists to be able to explain the beauty of the unsolved world around us, how science equip us with ways to attack those, and for people to fall in love with data and ways to poke it and to massage it and to pull it apart and don't be afraid of attacking things.
Fantastic. I love that. And I love the comment, thanks there about STEAM and, kind of STEM plus arts. And as you say, reading, communications and thinking. We had a great discussion about, the philosophy of science as well. So there's really so much that you kind of bring in and include as a scientist. You mentioned communications, and this year you are a superstar of STEM. Please tell us what that means.
That actually topped my year last year. I was so happy when I was selected. So this is a program that is run by the Science and Technology Australia, and they selected 60 women, and these cohorts of women go for 2 years, and we receive training for, as I said, communicating science to the public. But the hope is that we also would break the stereotypes around what scientists look like. And hopefully, there would be one person that would see me or another superstar of STEM and would say that I look like her. I like the sound of what she's doing. I can see that she's not just buried in her lab or books. She likes running. She likes playing the piano. She likes reading. She has a sense of humor. So maybe I could also, go and work with her. And I hope that person, boy or girl, would email me or another one of the superstars of STEM and starts the conversation. And by hearing our stories, they get more interested in science. Um, and I hope that at that stage, I can tell them what things I did wrong so that they can learn from my mistakes and don't do them. So I think every generation has to be better than the next one. And if I wanted to add to the comment about philosophy, I think we had that discussion that I think one thing that I recommend everyone here does is for them to read the history of science and learn about philosophy. That is the difference that I see between myself, my generation, and the ones and the Einsteins and the von Neumanns and people that, or Marie Curie that you mentioned, people that were the scientists, notable scientists around the beginning of the 20th century. With the superstars of STEM, we also are trying to establish a communication with politicians, the policymakers. As scientists, we know how important it is not to be led by biases. So as humans, we are afflicted with confirmation bias. We tend to see a few things that reminds us of a person that we know or of ourselves. And then we think that person is going to be like us. Or we see a situation that reminds, we see the cloud and we think it looks like an ice cream. That's a confirmation bias. So scientists are taught to be skeptical, not cynical, skeptical. And we hope that with that, we can help the leaders, the decision makers to make decisions that are informed by science and by evidence. And yeah, so be out there and get our faces known to the public,
Yeah.
be the role models.
I think you can clearly see the difference when politics is informed by science and when it isn't, into the different strategies that happened in Australia and America, for example. Thank you, Mitra. Please do. Mitra's going to join us briefly at the end for a quick panel discussion. So if you do have questions, please do pop them in the chat for Mitra. But I would now like to hop from particle physics into chemistry and to find out more about the kind of jobs that chemists do. So for this, we're going to look quickly at some of the new forms of chemistry. And I'd like to mention quickly advanced manufacturing, for example, which uses technology and innovation to change up the way we make things. Things like additive manufacturing, so creating artificial limbs, firefighting hose fittings and face shields, for example, are all examples of that additive manufacturing or 3D printing, or focusing on next generation materials. So from ceramics that can shapeshift when you apply electricity to super tough materials that are made from abalone shells. Material scientists are transforming the materials that we use for building health and sustainability. So chemistry is far beyond that kind of explosive sort of reaction in the lab. And to tell us a little bit more about the kind of jobs that chemists do, we're going to jump to Perth to chat to Declan Burke. Now, Declan is an early career synthetic chemist who specialises in organometallic chemistry and clean energy. He's recently finished a Bachelor of Science with the University of Western Australia, and in 2018 he received a new Colombo Plan scholarship to travel to Nanjing University in China. He now works at Hazer Group on a wide range of things, including electrochemical cell design, a new type of purification method for graphite, catalyst development and optimization, patent review, market research, and preparing in-depth market reviews of state-of-the-art in a myriad of industrial fields. So you're just out of uni quite recently from the University of Western Australia, and you've joined Hazer Group. So what do you do on a day-to-day basis?
So from day to day, so I've been with Hazer for about a year, finished my honours in 2019 and started in 2020. I'd say I spend most days working on catalyst development at the moment is the big project that I'm working on. So that generally looks like I'll look for various aspects of our iron oxide catalyst and understanding the catalytic mechanism and reading scientific papers and reviewing the literature on those subjects and going back over data that has been done by other members of the company and looking over their data and doing desktop studies and looking at their models and trying to kind of put the information that they've gathered into a new light or a different light.
So did you always think about working in industry when you were doing your degree and before then?
No, so both of my parents have PhDs, and I was dead set on academia, and it turns out that that was not for me. I kind of worked that out over the course of my honours year, which various friends of mine had told me, "Hey man, I don't think academia is for you," but I had it in my head that it was, and turns out not. And I've made the right choice by moving away from academia. I think it's definitely a really valuable career for people that want to do it, but I don't think it's for me.
So we can see that you're not in a lab. You're in an office. You're wearing a Hawaiian shirt rather than a lab coat. You might have crazy hair, but it's your own hair and not Einstein hair. So you're definitely busting all of those science myths. What are the kind of skills that you're using day to day? Are they still the kind of skills that you were learning in uni? What are the sort of, is it just science, or are there other skills that you need as a scientist?
So in part, they are skills that I learned, I would say, mainly during my honours year, the main one being research. So that the ability to find a new topic that you don't know anything about and be like, okay, I need to know what a phonon is because I've heard of a photon. I've never heard of a phonon. And I need to know what this is, and I need to know what this is by 3 p.m. And so that kind of, knowing how to learn independently is really valuable. I'd say the other thing, and so that's within STEM. I'd say the most valuable thing from without STEM, my second major of my undergraduate was philosophy. And so I think that just has made me a better communicator, as well as able to put together, a coherent argument or a persuasive argument, as well as kind of encouraging you to be obstreperous and look at things from different angles and try and really aggressively poke holes in the strongest point of your argument, because it's very easy to just attack the weakest point of a theory. But one of the things that we get taught in undergraduate philosophy is the principle of charity, which is that in order to falsify a theory or to counter an argument, the best way to do that is to attack it at its strongest point and at its best formulation. And in an ideal world, what is the perfect counter to any theory or to any argument? And I think that helps.
Fantastic. And I think that's such an interesting thing about university, that really it's the only kind of place where you're going to get taught those kind of skills. We need to inspire our high school students, and Margaret Smith had a great question about how can school students get exposed to career opportunities through work experience and not just read about it. Now, as our youngest panelists, I'm wondering if you can kind of think back to your high school experience. How did you, obviously your parents were already sort of researching, so you could see that. What were your work experiences like, and how would you recommend that high school students can kind of get exposed to this sort of work experience in science?
In high school, I worked in a bookshop, in a secondhand bookshop, which was not as glamorous as people think that working in a secondhand bookshop would be. People think it's all, you get to read all day. You don't, you have a job to do. But it does mean that you're looking at thousands of different books and you're only reading the titles. You're only skimming the titles, but it does kind of clue you into there being a much larger world out there. So you don't have to read the books. You just look at them. In terms of other work experience, I worked in hospitality for 6 years, but that's whatever, I paid the bills. But in my gap year, I worked, I sold spas. I worked for a tech startup that was doing like a forms management app. But I also worked as a lab tech for the Department of Parks and Wildlife, and I was just pipetting for 6 hours a day. First job out of school. It was menial labor, but it was in a lab, and I got to see kind of the guts of science. And I would really, really strongly advise, if you have, even if you know even if you think you know exactly what you want to do, gap year, take a gap year. It is just find something unusual and do it for a year or 6 months, and then do something else unusual for 6 months, because a life unexamined is not a life well lived. If you just try different unusual things, it doesn't really matter what they even are. Just start poking and see what grabs you back.
Yeah, and they might be unexpected, as you say. Thanks so much, Declan. Declan's going to join us briefly at the end to answer another couple of questions, but I do want to go on to my next career area in science and talk about combining science with business, because we've heard some great examples now of how we can combine, how the skills that you learn in science are skills that you can take into startups as well. So in the same way that when you picture a scientist, you think of crazy, hair and white lab coat. When you think of an entrepreneur, you probably think of Elon Musk's or an app startup or things like that. But you can actually take, science is actually a hotbed of innovation that you can take into a myriad of different startup areas. And you can also take the skills which other startups traditionally have, for example, in industrial design or into engineering, into business of science. And to tell us a little bit more about that and about working with scientists in her business, I'd like to welcome Shanchan Wang, who is the founder and chief executive officer at Rome Technologies. So she formed that company in 2014 to enhance people's quality of life through novel health technologies. She's previously worked in startups, design consultancies, global brands, and manufacturing, taking ideas from concept through to development. She has a background in industrial design that's allowed her to cross-collaborate and focus on the delivery of appropriate, actionable, and tangible ideas to commercial viable products. She's also working on the commercialization, was part of that NASA hackathon that we talked about earlier. She's won over 5 international and design and innovation awards and been named as one of Australia's youngest innovators and the next generation of disruptive business leaders by Business Insider, AMP Amplify, Sydney Morning Herald, and Australian Women's Weekly Women of the Future. So I'd love to invite Shan now to unmute and to pop into the chat and tell us a little bit about her career working in health technologies. Welcome, Shan.
Hi, digital peeps. How are we all?
Thanks for joining us, Shan. Your background isn't a science degree, but industrial design. So why work with scientists?
I tell you what, scientists, you guys are a really smart bunch of people, and you guys are extremely fun to work with. I think, so Mitra and I, it's actually pretty funny. Mitra and I actually met through a hackathon. I didn't even realize she was a scientist. We were talking about problems and how to solve problems. And I think we kind of bonded on that. Going through design school, through university, or as we call it, design school, design has always been about solving problems. And, when you speak that universal language, it doesn't matter who you are, what you're doing. As long as you're trying to solve that problem and you're thinking the right way down those tracks, you kind of end up going, oh, wow. I suppose that's kind of how we ended up with a diverse group of team. I'm just going back to what Mitra was talking about previously beforehand. Having a diverse team, it really, how do I put it? It's really interesting, really fascinating, some of the actual solutions that come out of it. And it's fun at the end of the day.
Gosh, science is fun. That's crazy. And solving problems is fun. You're right. It's amazing to meet different people. What I love about your career journey, Shan, is that you've created your own career. Tell us about when you first got into that and thought about what problem you were going to solve. How did you come up with that concept for Rome Technologies, and what is it that you do?
Yeah, actually, I've kind of gone a zigzag pathway. This actually started off as a thesis project for me, graduating university. It was actually my honors thesis, and at the time, I think I was failing university. I wasn't doing too well. I remember my studies. My head of design pulled me up and said, "Dude, if you don't pick up, it's not going to be good for you." And I think at the time, I had a real good think, and I was actually walking towards my car at the time, and I had come across, oddly enough, a mum and her little girl, and she had this huge O2 cylinder. So me being me, walking past this, I was just trying to get to my car. You start to think, going, what's going on over there, right? As a designer, you're kind of curious, and you try and do a bit more research. And I found out that people like her with COPD, they unfortunately don't have anything available. There is no technologies that are available that actually solves these issues. And it was crazy to me. We have technologies that are as small as an iPhone, yet, in the healthcare system, we have huge devices, and they're hugely expensive, and kind of spurred me on, as a industrial designer by trade anyway, and that is my degree. You're given the skill set where, hey, if you've got this skill set, why not try and solve that problem? And that's something that's propelled me forward. I've been kind of fortunate in sense that the people that I met along the way that have supported my journey. I met a bunch of private equity, venture capital guys who have essentially taken me under their wing in that kind of sense, and have taught me the worlds of the dark pathway, right? The dark side, which is the finance world, to say the least, the commercial end. But it's been a very interesting journey. So my background is really started off with design, understanding the problem. And then I learned how to produce stuff with large companies, manufacturing, the production side. So that's a conceptual area right through to production. The commercial end of it is really how do you fund this? How do you turn this into some sort of business sense so that you have a viable company? Yes, you're solving a problem, but the company itself needs to be able to live in order to solve the problem in its first place. So I've kind of taken that really a zigzag journey. In terms of what we are actually doing, we're pretty excited. We're building a pretty exciting piece of technology at the moment. It's literally a device that can take in ambient air, so air from around us, and give you that pure O2. And the device is pretty much the size of, this is what I have at the moment, so a wallet, slightly bigger, of course, and it produces almost unlimited O2, of course, battery dependent. But yeah, so it's a pretty exciting piece of technology, and we think there's a lot of applications that are out there right now. And we're hoping that it really does solve. It's taken quite a long time, to say the least, to get from where it was a concept level to now a actual technology that functions. And now I can bring in all those sub skill sets that I learned along the way, all the mistakes that I've made essentially, and try and apply this across into my little company.
So speaking of those skill sets and just kind of, going back into the headset of being in high school, what were the kind of things that you would have said to yourself to sort of choose and to think about doing? What kind of skills or what kind of even things and actions might you take if you're interested in a career like where you are today?
Yeah, honestly, I had no clue what I wanted to do when I was graduating high school. No clue at all. I knew I wanted to build something. I knew I wanted to solve something. There was very interesting fields in engineering and also science. I loved design. I loved the idea of making stuff, but I also liked the idea of combining that arts side of it and also the build side of it together. I thought that was, for me, that was amazing. Like that to me opened a whole new world, right? And we, even in the company that I'm working, the project that I'm working on at the moment, which is that startup that we've been talking about, you know, we cross over in so many multiple fields. Like I've got a mechanical guy, I've got an electronics guy, I've got finance people, and we're kind of, I call ourselves like T-shaped. So you got to be good at relatively everything, but you got to be really specialized in particular areas. And we try and cross over as much as we can. So that's how you develop a better solution. If everybody understands what this problem really is, then you'll be trying to figure out, okay, so how can I use my key skill sets, right, crossover into certain areas in order to solve that problem. And in a way, this is the design school of me, which is what I kind of learned going through. It's kind of having that holistic skill set, being able to understand everything, but at the same time, you should be really good at that one thing. And as I said, I love design. That is my baby. I live and breathe design, but at the same time, I also love engineering and I love being able to solve problems. I mean, it's sometimes the simplest answer is always the simple ones, unfortunately. And those are the ones that are really hard to solve, but that's the fun of it.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And we do at Careers with STEM, we hear a lot talked about that kind of specialist knowledge and then broad knowledge being the kind of career of the future. In the minute or so that we have left, I'd love to invite all of our panel to now unmute. Please do pop your question if you have one in there. We have a very short time left to pop into these questions. I can see one coming up about the COVID situation where, COVID is very dependent on oxygen and, you know, you might get a bit of a push in that. So yes, thank you, Daniela. Great comment there.
Would you like me to answer it?
Pretty specific, so I might get you to answer that one in the chat. And just, I've got two participants who've raised their hand there. Do pop your questions into the Q&A so that I can see that pop up. While we're just waiting for that last question to pop in, Mitra, one piece of advice for people today interested in science, what would you say is your one piece of advice for people who might be interested in getting into a science career?
Do anything that you find interesting. That's my litmus test. So interesting for me sits at the nexus of joyful and meaningful. And meaningful encompasses useful. So if you find it interesting, do it. And then I don't think you're going to regret anything later on in life. No regrets. And do not ruminate. That's another one. You know, the could have, should have, would have, don't do it. Look at anything that has gone wrong, just do the lessons learned, but move on. Don't allow it to bring you down. Go for a run, distract yourself.
I have one. I think of it in this kind of terminology, right? If you've got 100 years to live, let's just say optimally, 80 years to live, 60 years of your life, you're going to be working for somebody. 50% of it, you'll be working for a project or on a problem. Do you want to solve a big problem? If you do, this is the best career to actually do it.
Fantastic. Great question coming from Nairi as well about students who are interested in non-university pathways. We do have a special section of the website on vocational education. More people are employed in STEM out of vocational pathways than in uni pathways, and there's a myriad of career opportunities. Declan, do you have any thoughts about going into science areas through vocational pathways?
Yeah, so I didn't meet the initial criteria for the maths for the degree that I took, and I took a bridging maths course at university, and it was taught by a really eccentric maths professor who was, I think, the best teacher I've ever had. And I think specifically because I see this so often, so many of my friends that are like, kind of on the edge of STEM, they're like, oh, I'm just not good at maths. And I think that so often it's less, and that's less of a problem, and it's more that they haven't had someone who is extremely good at maths and a very good teacher teach them. And those people are out there, and people who take those bridging courses are so often those people that are actually really good at teaching maths and making maths engaging. Because I think a lot of people, and there's going to be a wave of cringes, I'm sure, but maths is actually fun and actually interesting. It's just, it is so often not taught as well as it should be, in my opinion. And I was very lucky to have Matthew as a lecturer, even if he did come in barefoot 50% of the time because he forgot his shoes.
Can I second what Declan is saying? I think it's super important. I just saw the question there as well. I don't think there's nobody in the world that is not good at maths. I think you haven't had a good teacher. Read the book Science for Superheroes, or I think it's Physics of Superheroes. If you can count, if you can, in your head that is, then you're good at maths. My daughter told me she wanted to be a mathematician, and she's 7.5. And I said, why? And she said, because I'm good at multiplication and divisions. So she quickly equates it to mathematics. But I think mathematics is one of the easiest things to follow. Just pick up the Euclidean geometry book and go from the axioms and see how things build up. If you can walk on a straight line, you're already a specialist in geometry. I think humans are mathematicians. You just have to find the right person to teach you.
Yeah, and I think this good at maths argument, you don't need to be good at maths. You just need to keep doing it. Same way that, I'm not particularly good at skateboarding, but if I try really hard, I'm sure that I would get there eventually. We are running out of time. I would like to thank deeply my amazing panelists, Mitra Safavi, Shantan Wang, and Declan Burke. You'll find them all in the magazine, and if you're lucky, we might find some socials you can follow and find out more about their career pathways. If you are looking to find out more, Mitra is on the cover of the latest issue of Careers with Science. You can read it for free online. We do 4 magazines for you at each STEM discipline, so look out for the Maths magazine. We're going to bust all of those math stereotypes as well. You can find a back catalogue of magazines online, and on the careerswithstem.com website, if you just look up under news or career paths, you can sort out all of the information by STEM area, by study paths, whether you choose vocational or uni pathways. You can find quizzes to find out just exactly what kind of STEM area might suit you. So please do hop onto the website, follow us across all of our socials, and find out those more information about that online. And thank you so much for joining us in this webinar. I've certainly learnt a lot, as I always do, from the amazing scientists. We'll see you next time online, and don't forget to mark space in your calendar. Next Wednesday, same time, 12 o'clock, you'll find the information on the website, careerswithstem.com. Thanks everybody for joining us.